So what's been going on lately is this one developer, Xalavier Nelson, who is in charge of a couple of things, and one of the things that they're working on is the really cool, like, writing for Stranger Things VR, Hypnospace Outlaw, and more. So they're pretty cool, and they also work on El Paso Elsewhere Now, or El Paso Elsewhere, I think it's called. My bad. I played the demo for it, I think, during stream, and we really enjoyed that for what it was. But essentially, they had this tweet thread that showed up the other day. I don't know if they deleted it. No, it's right here. The tweet thread is basically, like a lot of people, I'm deeply excited about what the lovely folks at Larian accomplished with Baldur's Gate 3, but I want to gently, preemptively push back against players taking that excitement and using to apply criticism on a race standard to RPGs going forward. You can't separate a game from the process used to build it, so let's look at what Larian is taking in development and final version of this game. Dev cycle stretching back to 2017, 2 massive games and the definitive edition's worth of tech, institutional knowledge to draw from, super successful early access period lasting 3 years, providing crucial community feedback, bug hunting, and cash flow, over 400 developers with 7 different offices around the world, not including outsourcing partners, the licensed brand and world of one of the largest IPs in entertainment, D&D, at the apex of its popularity with the rise of the actual play movement and a movie. A small, incomplete list, Larian is coming in swinging with a gigantic weight of expectation to deal with, but they're also doing it with an immense amount of wind, direct experience, resources, specialty tooling, etc. at their backs. As a too long didn't read, in an era of mega games, Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the largest attempted, built by a specialized group of people using mature tech, specifically built to make this specific game, reinforced by invaluable mass player feedback, and market validation ahead of its launch. This is not a new baseline for RPGs, this is an anomaly. Trying to do the same thing in the same way, especially without the same advantages, can kill an entire group of studios. If they go as big or bigger with their next title, Larian themselves could die. That there's the risk and reward of the mega game. We are an industry dangling elephants over cliffs, pointing at the ones that don't collapse under their own weight as indictments, and to ones that do. So please celebrate the achievement represented by Baldur's Gate. It looks like a massive amount of effort is about to pay off in a big way. One of the brightest voices in the medium, but if you have to shout that every RPG should be like this going forward, you have no excuse. You've just missed the point. You've created expectations and conditions to ensure your favorite creators may never give you the thing you ever love again. Which, when you think about it, on the face of it, it's not what I would call a bad... So the message in and of itself isn't terrible. It actually makes a lot of sense when you really get down to brass tacks, mainly because of the fact that gamers themselves, as we all know, are incredibly entitled in a lot of ways. And it's not necessarily their fault at this point that they're so entitled, because devs and publishers have basically been working towards monopolizing every single moment of your time and trying to capitalize off of that by charging you for anything going on. Which means that every single game that's being made has to be making some kind of profit. It has to have some kind of monetization. It has to deal with player retention in some way. So because of that, because of the way that games have now been been made more so to attack a player's investment and to try to expound upon that, players have in turn become more entitled to games where it's like, okay, we'll give you these things as long as the experiences that you're giving back to us are good and are worthy of the money that you're asking for us to give you. But I also feel like player expectation when it comes to the AAA market has exceeded the boundaries in which many companies and developers are just truly able to do. And it's not due to lack of budget or even lack of imagination, but more so to the fact that the unfortunate reality for a lot of AAA development studios, and why I think that on some level AAA does deserve to crash, is because of the fact that so many publishers refuse to actively work towards games that aren't going to be immediate profits. You see the same thing happening within Hollywood and with every form of media across the board, essentially. There's this really big issue in which tons of people just would much rather, tons of the executives and studio heads would much rather crank out like stuff that they know, sequels, reliable, money-making devices, more so than anything actually truly collaborative or creative in any sense. And that really sucks because a lot of that has bled into the games industry because of people like Andrew House and that one Peter guy who now works with Zynga. I forget his name, but he used to work with Microsoft. Peter Hines or something like that. I might be fucking the name up, but he's the one who fucked up the original Xbox One showcase during E3, the whole TV guy.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Xbox One. TV experience. TV. TV and movies. TV. Xbox. Watch TV. 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 Watch TV. TV. TV and TV remote. TV experience. TV. 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 Sports TV. 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 Anybody?
And it on some level, I agree that I think gamers need to kind of be a little bit more informed, because as the vocal minority, essentially, there's a whole market of people out there that these kinds of games could appeal to that do not tap into these kinds of things. They're not the ones going to be talking about this. They're not the ones consuming the content that you guys are consuming right now. They're not going out of their way to watch streams, to, you know, get the news sources. They're not reading articles. They're basically living their lives and casually, like, interfacing with all of the things that they enjoy. So there's a lot of D&D fans who are probably being told about Baldur's Gate that this game's probably going to blow up. This game's probably going to sell upwards of 10 million within the first month, just on the basis of it being the closest we get to a true D&D game-like simulation we've ever seen. So that in and of itself is already, like, kind of a big deal. But the problem is that so many people who are from the vocal minority are also speaking from a place where they have no idea what the fuck they're talking about. And I also am not going to act like I know every little thing about game development. I have the most, like an inkling of knowledge when it comes into consideration of what true development is all about and what it actually means and what its true goals and what really dictates what makes a good game, essentially, at the end of the day. And even some of that is based on more of a subjective stance more than the objectivity of game development. But I think that most gamers don't understand that one of the major reasons why games are not as good as they are anymore is not only because of the frequent monetization, the idea to keep pushing for any kind of player retention values. It's also because the dev cycles are not given anywhere near as much time as necessary. So you've got corporations turning around and trying to churn out releases as fast as humanly possible, when in actuality, these kinds of games require upwards of 3 to 5 years of investment alone. One of the biggest issues, the biggest games that we were going to play that still ended up being very vastly successful, as we all know, was Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk, as we all know it, was not the game we were sold. It was not the game that we were told about. It was an entirely different game at launch. Even if a lot of people ended up enjoying the experience that they got, for as broken as it was, it just wasn't what we were sold. And we now know the reason why that is because the true dev cycle for the game was like around 18 or less than 18 months, which is an insane ask to even think about. The idea that they barely had 2 years to create what we ended up actually getting is fucking insanity. To have that much of an open world be created, to have that many things to try to pour into it, to have this many systems to try to do, no wonder the game was so half-baked at launch, because it was basically half-developed, which is why now in 2023 we're seeing a relaunch of sorts with the new expansion pack coming out, and a game that probably would have been infinitely better had it just been given the time to launch in the year of 2022 or even 2023. It probably also would have made a lot more sense, because we're see that happening with way more games. That's why 2023 is such an amazingly stacked year of games, because so many games had to basically get held off because of the COVID shit that happened and all of the bullshit that happened with all that came with that. And I think Cyberpunk would have absolutely benefited from more time in the oven, as everybody already knows. And it's just a shame, because this isn't the only game doing this. You can absolutely tell from the get-go, when a AAA game was given enough time, enough development, enough money to become what it wanted to be, and then when you can see the problems in the wall, and it happens in terms of general design, the amount of bugs that exist, the idea that maybe the story feels half-baked, maybe there's mechanics that just don't work outright, we can see the developer troubles and the woes very clearly now. Because it's been made so much clearer by the idea that now, with all these exposés coming out, and the idea that AAA developers and publishers are just not doing what they can to really make good experiences anymore, it's so much more evident. And it sucks. It really sucks. However, that being said, I think the part where I disagree and where I'm going to probably bring up the rest of the article talking about it is an immense amount of developers and people came forward and were talking about, like, just agreeing with this from the get-go. They were like, oh yeah, you know, we this is absolutely something that, like, we can't do this. We can't increase in size. We're already stretched way too thin. And all of these things are true. But the reason they're stretched way too thin is the same reason why SAG-AFTRA is on strike. Because ultimately, even with the 200... When we look at a game like Last of Us or something like Horizon Zero Dawn, and we learn that respectively the budgets for each of those games were $231 million and $220 apiece, we think about where those millions of dollars are actively going, and we don't understand that that's not just inclusive of the dev cost. That's the entire budget for their entire lifespan of the game. It's the marketing budget. It's you know, the manpower. It's buying into the food for the developers. It's the bonuses. It's all of that shit. All of this culminates into one budget, right? So when you hear about these absolutely crazy ballooning budgets of $500 million, almost always more than not, it's because these fucking developers, or not developers, these publishers are spending way more money on marketing and trying to get the game out there and as seen as many eyes as possible, as opposed to actively funneling those resources into actual dev time. I bet you 10 to 1 if you talk to any AAA dev and you're told that you have an exclusively $500 million budget for dev time, they would be salivating at the mouth and be like, not only are we going to get properly paid for our work, but the budget and the scope of what we want to do, the expanse of what can be possible in the game that we want to create, has now just generally exploded. But for the most part, a lot of publishers just force producers and the team leads to kind of deal with these situations where, yeah, you want to create these crazy AAA experiences, but you're not giving people either enough money or enough time to actively work on it, so they end up having to feed into the crunch culture, and it becomes this weird, awful cycle where it's like, not to mention the fact that all of the weird, clicky shit that happens in a lot of AAA game dev studios already, where I've heard from several sources, not only people that I know personally, but several sources that I've read online, where AAA development is a crapshoot. It's like, it really depends on what, you know, company that you're with, but for the most part, it's all very like click-like culture, or there's a lot of people who, because of the fact that game development as a whole isn't what I would consider a job that you would keep for so long, you can work on one game and that would be your one game in that entire studios, and your entire lifetime within that studio can be just that one game, that 3 to 4 years you were working on it, and then you have to find another job because they just can't find another place for you to be, or they just don't think you're worthy enough to keep on for the next project or whatever, because it's not even about whether or not you're skilled or you know, like that. It's just more so that you're another mouth to feed, and they need that money to reinvest within bonuses for executives and investors. On top of inflation, on top of the shitty economy that everybody is dealing with consistently, you're now talking about the dragon's hoard of gold at the top of every single corporate scenario, wherein dozens and dozens of executives are basically funneling all of the wealth of the company into their bonuses and then giving everything back to the investors to make them happy enough to keep their fucking $1 million lifestyles at play. And that is easily the biggest problem, is that if you look across the board, it isn't just video games, it's a societal problem at its core. CEOs and people on the board of directors do not need to be making $10 million bonuses for just showing up and doing their job. And their job, which, by the way, does maybe a 0.1% of the actual creative process that comes in from any of the game creation, which is why I think it's so important for games and game developers and all these things to start unionizing, so we have the same kind of power that SAG-AFTRA does, so we shut down these corporations, we shut down these markets, and we show them exactly what's important, and that's to keep devs happy, keep devs fed, keep devs in their homes, and more often than not, keep devs creative. And they can't do these things without money. but that money is not going into the hands of the fucking creators. It never does. It's always going to the select few, and unless we decide to turn around and do anything about that, this is gonna continue to be the fucking case with AAA game development. You're gonna keep running into the same situation over and over again, where it's just like, I just want to play a AAA game that doesn't make me want to tear my fucking hair out, or doesn't require a 3-month investment for me to even like enjoy past a certain amount. I just want to play a AAA game, like a good experience, an amazing cinematic gameplay experience, without having to have all of the silly bells and whistles of free-to-play monetization. I want my $60, $70 games to be going towards games developers, and for it to not be seen as a fucking loss if they don't make back millions and millions of dollars. So there needs to be a thing that happens. One, game budgets need to be absolutely reworked and retinkered to allow for different kinds of games to be made, which is what, you know, Zalavier is talking about, is the idea that, like, not every RPG needs to be a Baldur's Gate. You don't need every RPG to have the same amount of creative freedom that Baldur's Gate allows you to do. A lot of JRPGs in and of themselves don't do that. They specifically try to tell stories within a much more concise structure, and because of that, you could probably look at something like Baldur's Gate, and there's going to be some fucking weirdos on the internet that are like, oh man, Baldur's Gate lets me do this, Final Fantasy could never, and it's like, Final Fantasy doesn't want to. And that leads back to the problem with gamers as a whole, is they don't understand that even within the same genre, not every game needs to adhere to or compete with the likes of Baldur Gate. Baldur Gate is a CRPG. It's a genre that I feel like a lot of people are going to jump headlong into with little to no knowledge. And even though this apparently is the easiest game to approach as a CRPG in comparison to things like Divinity or Pillars of Eternity or something like that, it is still very much a CRPG. So there's going to be a lot of people who pick this game up and face a weird kind of culture shock that they haven't done before, where they're like, I've never played a game like this before in my entire life. This is kind of crazy. And they think that's going to be a normal RPG, or that all RPGs should be like this or are like this, and if they're not like this, then it's not worth it. And that sucks, because it means that people just can't be creative and create the experiences that they want to do. However, if you are trying to create a true role-playing experience, if the thing that you're selling is akin to something like a Baldur's Gate, or like how Cyberpunk was approaching it, where it was like, you can truly make your own character and be your own person and do all these things, then by all means, they should be held to the same standard as others within the industry. It's fine that Baldur's Gate can raise the standard, and I think it's going to do so regardless of whether or not people want it to. I think the problem is that ultimately we have to teach gamers that Baldur's Gate is not this fucking one standard that every single game needs to reach. If you're trying to go out of your way by saying, I want to create an RPG experience, the likes of which is close to Baldur's Gate, that makes sense. But like, it's strange because so many fucking gamers want these kinds of experiences, and they don't understand that the amount of work, time, and money that's necessitated for that is insane. Baldur's Gate was an early access title. Like, it had 45 minutes to an hour's worth of content at one point in time. And now it's got over 177 hours of cinematics. Like, this has been developed since 2017. It's taken years to get to this point. Larian has basically been working on one game, essentially, for this amount of time, with like the definitive editions of Divinity. They have some B teams working on, but ultimately, their whole team has been working on one experience. And it's going to be a great one, but you have to really understand the amount of investment that goes into these things. And that's what I agree with Zalavier and Nelson, but the thing that I disagree with is that AAA shouldn't be held to that standard. I think that honestly what needs to happen is there needs to be a reorganization of profits. There needs to be unionization across the board. It needs to have a bunch of things that are different to make it so that AAA games can get to the point that they can. But I'm going in circles at this point. So that's essentially my opinion on the Baldur's Gate drama. My huge rant, unmitigated, breathless rant on it.